Before I begin, I'd appreciate it if you'd let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It always warms my heart to see how far these stories travel. My son, David, the boy I poured my life into, looked me straight in the eyes one Tuesday afternoon and told me I was becoming senile. He said it with a kind of clinical detachment, as if he were diagnosing a faulty appliance, not shattering his mother's world. He thought I was finished, a burden to be managed. But I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. This is the story of how Martha, a woman he'd written off, outsmarted him in a court of law and reclaimed not just my assets, but my dignity. It's funny, the things you remember when your world starts to tilt on its axis. After David dropped that bomb, my mind didn't immediately race to lawyers or fight-back strategies. Instead, I found myself thinking about the time he was 7 and had a raging fever. I'd held him for 3 straight nights, bathing his forehead with cool cloths, whispering stories until my throat was raw. His father, bless his departed soul, had been a good man but rarely present, always chasing the next business venture that never quite panned out. So, it was just David and me, a tiny, fiercely protective unit against the world. I'd worked 2 jobs back then, bookkeeping in the mornings and waitressing in the evenings, just to ensure he had everything he needed and most of what he wanted. Piano lessons he'd begged for and then abandoned after a month, the expensive art supplies for a fleeting passion for painting, the endless stream of video games. I never once begrudged him. Seeing his face light up was my reward, my fuel. I suppose, looking back, I might have spoiled him, shielded him too much from the harsh realities of sacrifice. I wanted his childhood to be golden, untouched by the struggles I faced. And for a long time, I thought I'd succeeded. He grew up, got a decent job in middle management, married a woman named Clarice who always struck me as having eyes that appraised more than they appreciated. Still, he was my David, my son, the center of my universe, even as my universe was supposed to be gracefully shrinking in my later years. I lived in the house his father and I had bought half a century ago, a modest but sturdy home filled with memories, both sweet and bittersweet. It was paid off, a testament to years of careful budgeting and deferred dreams. My pension was comfortable enough, supplemented by a few wise investments my late husband, Arthur, had insisted upon despite my cautious nature at the time. I wasn't wealthy, but I was secure, and I relished my independence. The garden I tended, the book club I adored, the quiet evenings with a good mystery novel. These were the small, precious joys of my 72 years. The first subtle shift began about a year before David's pronouncement. He and Clarice started visiting more frequently, which initially pleased me. But their visits soon developed a pattern. Clarice would steer the conversation towards my health, her voice dripping with a concern that felt manufactured. "Are you remembering to take your pills, Martha?" "All of them?" she'd ask, her gaze sharp. David would then chime in, "Mom, you seem a bit tired lately. Maybe you should consider getting some help around the house, help I didn't need nor want." My house was tidy, my mind, I thought, as clear as ever. I still balanced my own checkbook, managed my investments online, and could recount the plot of the latest bestseller with perfect accuracy to my book club friends. But they persisted. Little comments, like water dripping on a stone. "Did you forget our dinner plans last week, Mom?" We had to call 3 times, a dinner plan I was sure they'd only vaguely mentioned, then insisted was firmly set. Or Clarice would find things I'd supposedly misplaced, my glasses on top of my head, the remote in its usual spot, presented with a sigh that implied my increasing incompetence. It was subtle, insidious, and I started to feel a creeping unease, a sense of being gaslighted in my own home. I'd brush it off, telling myself I was being overly sensitive. This was David, my son. He loved me. Clarice, well, she was his wife. The Tuesday David uttered the word senile was after a particularly orchestrated incident. He'd asked me to look up some old financial documents related to his student loans, papers I'd kept meticulously filed for decades. I went to my old roll-top desk, a place where I knew every cubbyhole and drawer by heart. But the specific folder he wanted wasn't in its usual place. I searched, a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest, while David and Clarice watched me with that patient, pitying look that was becoming increasingly familiar. "Take your time, Mom," David said, his tone overly gentle. Clarice sighed softly, a sound designed to convey long suffering. After 10 minutes of increasingly frantic searching, feeling their eyes on my back, I had to admit I couldn't find it. My cheeks burned with a frustration I couldn't quite voice. It should have been there. It was always there. Later that evening, after they'd helped me search fruitlessly for another hour, making a show of looking in the most illogical places, David sat me down in my favorite armchair. Clarice hovered nearby, wringing her hands in a display of concern that would have done an actress proud. "Mom," David began, his voice low and serious, "Clarice and I have been very worried about you. This forgetting things, it's getting worse." I opened my mouth to protest, to say that the folder felt deliberately moved, but he pressed on. "The other day, you couldn't remember where you parked at the grocery store. And you missed Dr. Henderson's appointment last month. Small incidents, twisted and magnified. I'd found my car after a moment's confusion in a crowded lot, and Dr. Henderson's office had called to reschedule, a fact they conveniently omitted. We think," he continued, glancing at Clarice for support, "that you might be, well, showing signs of senility, Mom. It's nothing to be ashamed of, it happens. But it means you can't really manage on your own anymore." The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Senile. It felt like a brand, a dismissal of everything everything I'd ever been. My mind, my thoughts, my very essence, reduced to a medical condition he was unqualified to diagnose. I remember the shock being so profound it was almost physical, like a cold wave washing over me, leaving me numb and breathless. My carefully constructed world, my independence, my very identity, all threatened by that one, casually delivered word. Clarice then produced a glossy brochure for Golden Meadows Retirement Village, its cheerful cover a stark contrast to the despair blooming in my heart. "It's a lovely place, Martha," she chirped. "They have round-the-clock care activities. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing," David nodded. "And we could help you with your finances, Mom. Make sure everything is taken care of so you don't have to stress about bills or investments anymore." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The missing folder, the exaggerated memory lapses, the feigned concern, it was all a prelude to this. They wanted control. Control of me, control of my assets, control of the house I was sitting in. The house that was mine. My initial reaction wasn't anger, not yet. It was a deep, aching pain. A betrayal so profound it felt like a physical wound. This was David, the boy whose fevers I'd nursed, whose dreams I'd funded with my own sweat and sacrifice. And he was looking at me as if I were already gone. The days that followed were a blur of bewildered hurt and a growing, chilling awareness. David and Clarice didn't let up. They called daily, their voices syrupy with false solicitude, asking if I'd eaten, if I'd taken my non-existent, apart from a daily vitamin medication, if I'd had any confused spells. Each call felt like another nail being hammered into the coffin of my autonomy. They started bringing over documents for me to sign. "Just routine things, Mom, to make it easier for us to help you, powers of attorney, bank authorizations." I'd stare at the dense legal jargon, my mind, which they claimed was failing, racing to understand the implications. I'd stall, saying I needed my reading glasses, or I felt too tired, or I wanted to think about it. Each excuse was met with sighs and exchanged glances between them, reinforcing their narrative that I was becoming difficult and uncooperative due to my condition. The missing folder from my desk preyed on my mind. I knew, with a certainty that defied their insinuations, that I hadn't misplaced it. After they left one afternoon, having tidied up my kitchen with an efficiency that felt more like an invasion, I searched my desk again. This time, I was methodical, pulling everything out. Tucked deep behind a rarely used ledger, I found it, the folder David had asked for. A cold fury began to replace the hurt. It hadn't been misplaced. It had been moved, hidden, to create an illusion of my failing memory. This wasn't concern. It was calculation. This was a deliberate, cruel campaign. The turning point, The moment my sorrow solidified into a diamond-hard resolve came about a week later. I was in my garden, pruning my roses, trying to find solace among the familiar blooms, when I overheard David and Clarice talking in the kitchen. The window was slightly ajar. Clarice's voice was sharp, impatient. "She's being stubborn, David. We need to push harder. If she won't sign the papers willingly, we'll have to explore other options. That lawyer friend of yours, what did he say about competency hearings?" My blood ran cold. The competency hearings? They were actually planning to drag me into court to officially declare me mentally unfit? David's reply was mumbled, but I caught phrases like, "It's for her own good," and "the house alone is worth a fortune." My home, the repository of my life's memories, reduced to a monetary value they were eager to claim. The last vestiges of my hope that this was some misguided, albeit clumsy, attempt at caring for me, shattered. This was about greed, pure and simple. They saw me not as a mother, but as an obstacle, an aging inconvenience sitting on assets they felt entitled to. I remember sinking onto my small garden bench, the secateur falling from my numb fingers. The scent of the roses, usually a comfort, seemed cloying, almost funereal. For a long moment, I felt utterly defeated, a small, old woman against two determined, younger predators. Who would believe me? They were so convincing in their roles as concerned children. But then, a different feeling began to stir within me. It wasn't the fiery rage I might have felt in my younger years, but a cold, still anger, a deep, resonant certainty that I would not let this happen. I had bent, but I would not break. I had sacrificed for David my whole life, but I would not sacrifice my dignity, my home, my very self to his avarice. They thought I was senile? They thought I was finished? They had no idea who they were dealing with. I had faced down far worse than a greedy son and his grasping wife in my time. I had navigated widowhood, financial uncertainty, and the loneliness that can sometimes creep in with age, and I had done it with my head held high. This was just another battle, albeit one I had never imagined I'd have to fight. That evening, I didn't wait for their call. I let it go to voicemail, listening to David's feigned concern with a new, detached clarity. The game had changed. They had drawn their lines, and now, quietly, secretly, I would draw mine. My first act of quiet rebellion was to reach out to Eleanor Vance, a woman from my book club. Eleanor wasn't just a fellow reader. She was a retired paralegal, sharp as a tack, with a no-nonsense attitude I'd always admired. I called her the next morning, my voice carefully neutral, asking if we could meet for coffee. "Something's come up, Eleanor," I said, "and I could really use your perspective." We met at a small cafe, away from my neighborhood, away from any place David and Clarice might frequent. As I laid out the story, trying to keep the emotion from my voice, Eleanor listened intently, her intelligent eyes missing nothing. She didn't interrupt, just nodded occasionally, her lips tightening as I described the missing folder and the overheard conversation. When I finished, she reached across the table and patted my hand. "Martha," she said, her voice firm, "those two are playing a very ugly game. But you're not alone in this." Her validation was like a balm to my bruised spirit. She didn't doubt me, didn't suggest I might be misinterpreting things. She saw the situation for what it was. "The first thing you need," Eleanor stated, "is a good lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone who specializes in elder law and contested guardianships. And you need one now, before they make their next move." She gave me a name, Monica Holloway. "She's young," Eleanor said, "but she's a tiger. And she despises bullies." The next day, I called Monica Holloway's office. Her assistant was warm and efficient, and I managed to get an appointment for the following week. The intervening days were a strange dance. I resumed answering David and Clarice's calls, playing the part of the slightly confused, tired mother they wanted to see. I'd forget small things, ask them to repeat themselves, sigh about how overwhelming everything felt. It was a performance and a draining one, but I knew it was necessary to lull them into a false sense of security, to make them believe their plan was working. When I met Monica, I was immediately struck by her directness and keen intelligence. She was indeed young, perhaps in her late 30s, but her gaze was steady and her questions precise. I told her everything, just as I had told Eleanor, but this time I included my suspicions about how they might be trying to isolate me, how they subtly undermined my confidence. I even confessed my own brief moments of doubt, wondering if perhaps I was losing my edge, a fear they had so cleverly planted. Monica listened without judgment. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair. "Martha," she said, her tone professional yet compassionate, "what your son and daughter-in-law are doing is, unfortunately, not uncommon. But it is reprehensible. And yes, based on what you've told me, they are likely gearing up to file for a conservatorship or guardianship, claiming you're incapacitated." Hearing the legal terms spoken aloud solidified the threat. "So, what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We fight back," Monica said, a small, determined smile playing on her lips. "And we do it strategically. First, I want you to get a full cognitive assessment from a reputable geriatric neurologist. Not just any doctor, someone whose credentials will stand up in court. I have a few names I can recommend." She explained that an independent, thorough assessment would be our strongest piece of evidence against any claims of senility. "Second," she continued, "start documenting everything. Every call, every visit, every comment they make that feels manipulative or dismissive. Dates, times, exact words if you can remember them. Keep a journal. If you have an answering machine, save any messages that sound particularly revealing." She also advised me to secure my financial documents, perhaps even consider a safe deposit box. And she told me not to sign anything, absolutely anything, they put in front of me without her reviewing it first. "They think you're vulnerable and confused, Martha," Monica said, her eyes meeting mine. "We're going to use that underestimation to our advantage." I left Monica's office feeling a surge of hope, the first I'd felt in weeks. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a woman with a plan, a warrior preparing for battle. The path ahead was daunting, but for the first time since David uttered that dreadful word, I felt a flicker of my old strength returning. I was no longer just Martha, the aging mother. I was Martha, the client of Monica Holloway, and I was ready to fight for my life. The next few weeks were a masterclass in clandestine operations, or so it felt to me. My first priority was the cognitive assessment Monica had recommended. She gave me the name of a Dr. Ramirez, a highly respected neurologist. Getting an appointment wasn't immediate, and the waiting period was nerve-wracking. David and Clarice continued their campaign of concern, their visits becoming more frequent, their pressure more insistent. "Mom, we really need you to sign these forms for the bank. It's just so we can help pay your bills if you forget," David would say, holding out a pen with an air of strained patience. I'd feign confusion. "Oh, dear, which bills? I thought I paid the electricity yesterday. Or was that last week?" I'd pat my pockets vaguely. "And I can't seem to find my reading glasses again," Clarice would sigh dramatically. "Martha, we went over this. It's just a precaution." Their underestimation of me was, as Monica predicted, my greatest shield. They saw my stalling as confirmation of my decline, not as a deliberate tactic. Meanwhile, I started my journal. Every evening, after they'd left, or after one of their cloying phone calls, I'd sit down with a simple spiral notebook and write. I recorded their words, their tones, the subtle shifts in their tactics. October 12th, David and Clarice visited. Clarice found my keys in the sugar bowl. Swore I must have put them there. I know I didn't. Felt like a test. David urged me to let him set up online bill pay for me, said I was probably getting overwhelmed. October 15th, phone call from David. Asked if I remembered his birthday next month. Of course I do. He sounded surprised when I reminded him he'd always loved carrot cake. Clarice in background. See, she does remember some things condescending. The act of writing it down was cathartic, but also chilling. Seeing the pattern of their manipulation laid out in black and white was stark. I also took Monica's advice about securing my important papers. I rented a small safe deposit box at a different bank from where I usually did my business. One afternoon, while David and Clarice thought I was napping, I'd feigned exhaustion after Clarice rearranged my pantry to make things easier to find, dear. I carefully packed my will, my investment statements, property deeds, and Arthur's old love letters, precious things I didn't want falling into their hands or, accidentally, going missing. The appointment with Dr. Ramirez finally arrived. I was a bundle of nerves. What if they were right? What if my mind was starting to betray me? The tests were thorough, lasting several hours. Memory recall, problem-solving, abstract thinking. Dr. Ramirez was kind, patient, explaining each step. At the end, she smiled warmly. "Martha," she said, "based on this comprehensive assessment, your cognitive functions are well within the normal range for a healthy woman of your age. In fact, in several areas, you score significantly above average. There are absolutely no clinical signs of dementia or senility." Relief washed over me so profoundly I felt tears prick my eyes. It wasn't just about the legal battle. It was about reclaiming my own certainty in myself. I asked her for a detailed written report, which she readily agreed to provide directly to Monica's office. Armed with this knowledge, my performances for David and Clarice became almost enjoyable, in a grim sort of way. I was an actress in my own private play, knowing I held a secret they couldn't fathom. I also started making quiet changes to my financial landscape under Monica's guidance. We reviewed my will. My original will left everything to David, as my only child. Monica suggested that, given the circumstances, I might want to reconsider that, perhaps set up a trust, or make provisions for other people or charities I cared about. The thought was painful. Disinheriting my own son? But then I thought of his cold eyes when he called me senile, Clarice's greedy smile when she spoke of golden meadows. This wasn't just about money. It was about ensuring my legacy, everything Arthur and I had worked for, wouldn't be squandered or seized by deceit. I made some difficult decisions, changes that reflected my new reality. Monica also helped me draft a very firm, legally sound revocation of any and all previous powers of attorney I might have inadvertently signed or been pressured into signing in the past. It felt empowering to sign that document. I was taking back control, piece by piece. All this while, I played the part of the fading matriarch. I'd forget ingredients for my famous apple pie, a recipe I knew by heart. I'd ask Clarice to read my mail to me, claiming the print was too small. Each act of feigned helplessness seemed to delight them, confirming their biases, making them more confident, more careless. Little did they know, this senile, old woman was building a fortress around herself, brick by meticulous brick. The inevitable summons arrived on a crisp November morning. It was delivered by a courier, a thick, ominous envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I signed for it, even though I'd been expecting it. David and Clarice had filed a petition for conservatorship, formally requesting the court to declare me incompetent and appoint David as the conservator of my person and my estate. The legal language was cold, brutal, painting a picture of me as a confused, helpless individual incapable of managing her own affairs, a danger to herself. They cited the missing folder, my supposed forgetfulness about appointments, my inability to handle my finances, all the carefully constructed incidents they had orchestrated. Reading their sworn statements, filled with half-truths and outright lies, ignited a fresh wave of anger, but this time it was a focused, determined anger. They had truly underestimated me. I immediately called Monica. "They've done it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The papers are here." "Good," Monica replied, her tone calm and ready. "This is what we've been preparing for, Martha. Bring everything to my office tomorrow morning." It's time to formally file our response the next day. In Monica's office, we went over the petition line by line. Her sharp legal mind dissected their claims, identifying weaknesses and inconsistencies. Dr. Ramirez's report was now our cornerstone. "Their entire case hinges on convincing the judge you're mentally incapacitated," Monica explained. This report, she tapped the thick document, blows a rather large hole in that argument. We prepared my affidavit in response, a sworn statement detailing my side of the story. It was difficult to recount their betrayals, to put into words the pain and manipulation I had endured. But with Monica's guidance, I focused on the facts, on the evidence we had gathered, my journal entries, the timing of their pressure coinciding with their requests for financial control, the incident with the hidden folder. We also prepared to subpoena bank records that might show if David had any unusual financial pressures that could be motivating his actions. Monica suspected he might be in debt, given his and Clarice's increasingly desperate push. The weeks leading up to the court hearing were intense. Monica prepped me rigorously. We went over potential questions the opposing lawyer might ask, how to answer calmly and clearly, how to avoid being flustered or provoked. "They will try to make you look confused, Martha," she warned. "They'll twist your words, try to trip you up. The key is to stay calm, stick to the truth, and look the judge in the eye." My friend Eleanor Vance was a rock during this time. She'd call to check in, offer encouragement, and remind me of my own strength. Her unwavering belief in me was a lifeline. David and Clarice, meanwhile, seemed to believe they had already won. Their calls became less frequent, their tone shifting from feigned concern to a sort of preemptive authority. David once called to discuss, "What color we should paint your room at Golden Meadows, Mom?" "Something cheerful, I think." I managed to reply with a vague, "Oh, that's something to consider, dear," while inwardly, my resolve hardened further. The audacity, the sheer arrogance of it, was breathtaking. They were already redecorating my cage. I spent hours in my garden, finding a strange solace in the familiar rhythm of weeding and tending to my plants. It was my sanctuary, the one place their negativity couldn't fully penetrate. I thought of Arthur, of how he would have been outraged by David's behavior. I drew strength from his memory, from the life we had built together, a life I was now fighting to protect from our own son. The day before the hearing, Monica and I had one final meeting. "Are you ready, Martha?" she asked gently. I took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. I wasn't just fighting for my independence anymore. I was fighting for every older person who had ever been dismissed, underestimated, or preyed upon. I was fighting for my dignity, and I was determined to win. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, more mundane, yet it hummed with an undercurrent of tension that made my skin prickle. Sunlight streamed weakly through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Monica sat beside me at our table, a picture of calm professionalism, her files neatly arranged. Across the aisle, David and Clarice sat with their lawyer, a portly man named Mr. Henderson whose smile seemed permanently fixed in a condescending smirk. David wouldn't meet my eye. He fidgeted with his tie, looking pale and anxious. Clarice, however, stared straight ahead, her expression one of grim determination, a martyr already anticipating her sainthood for taking on such a burden. My heart ached looking at David. This was my son, the boy I loved, now my legal adversary. But the ache was overlaid with a layer of tempered steel. He had chosen this path. The judge, a woman named Sarah Chen, entered, and we all rose. She had a stern but fair face, her eyes sharp and observant. As Mr. Henderson began to lay out their case, I focused on Monica's earlier advice. Stay calm, breathe, listen. He painted a picture of me as a frail, confused old woman, a danger to myself and my finances. He spoke of my increasing paranoia, my inability to recall recent events, my resistance to loving help. He called it a tragic but necessary step to protect me. It was like listening to a fictionalized account of my life, a distorted reflection in a carnival mirror. Then David took the stand. His voice was thick with emotion, feigned, I was certain, but probably convincing to anyone who didn't know the full story. He recounted instances of my forgetfulness, embellishing and twisting them. He spoke of his deep love and concern for me, tears welling in his eyes as he described how hard it was to see me fade away. "We just want what's best for her, Your Honor," he choked out, dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief Clarice thoughtfully provided. "We want her to be safe and cared for." Listening to him, I felt a strange mix of anger and profound sadness. How had we come to this? How had the little boy who clung to my hand become this stranger, capable of such calculated deceit? Clarice was next. Her testimony was even more dramatic, filled with sighs and sorrowful headshakes. She described finding my medication unused, even though I took only a daily multivitamin. She recounted how I'd gotten lost in my own neighborhood during a walk, an incident where I'd merely stopped to chat with a neighbor for longer than expected. She painted herself as the dutiful, long-suffering daughter-in-law, forced to intervene out of sheer compassion. "It breaks my heart to do this," she said, her voice trembling, "but Martha simply isn't capable anymore. She needs professional help. The responsibility is too much for us to bear alone, especially with her resisting our efforts." Mr. Henderson presented their evidence, carefully selected anecdotes, a few doctor's appointment reminders I'd supposedly missed, which had actually been rescheduled by the clinics themselves, and a blurry photo of my slightly cluttered kitchen counter, implying chaos and neglect. Through it all, I kept my composure, my gaze fixed either on Judge Chun or straight ahead. I could feel David and Clarice occasionally glancing my way, probably expecting to see me distraught or confused. I offered them nothing but a calm, steady presence. Monica made few objections during their presentation, mostly letting them build their narrative. I trusted her strategy. She squeezed my hand once, a small gesture of reassurance that meant the world. The morning wore on, a slow, agonizing drip of accusations and misrepresentations. During a short recess, Monica leaned in. "They're overplaying their hand," she whispered. "Their portrayal is almost a caricature. Stay strong, Martha. Our turn is coming." And as I sat there, waiting for the proceedings to resume, I thought, they truly believe this image they've created. They see a fragile old woman on the verge of collapse. They have no idea they're about to face a woman who has found her fire again. When court reconvened, it was Monica's turn. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and resonant, "we are here today because Mr. David Jennings and his wife, Clarice Jennings, have made some very serious allegations about my client, Mrs. Martha Jennings. They paint a picture of a woman lost to senility, incapable of managing her own life. We are here to demonstrate that this picture is not only inaccurate, but a deliberate misrepresentation designed for their own financial gain." A ripple of surprise went through David and Clarice's side of the room. Mr. Henderson half rose to object, but Judge Chin waved him down. "Ms. Holloway, you may proceed." Monica's first witness was Dr. Elena Ramirez, the geriatric neurologist. Dr. Ramirez, poised and articulate, detailed the comprehensive cognitive assessment she had performed on me. She explained the various tests, their purpose, and my performance on each. "Mrs. Jennings," Dr. Ramirez stated unequivocally, "exhibits cognitive functions that are not only normal for her age, but in several areas, notably verbal memory and executive function, she scores above average. There is absolutely no clinical evidence of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, or what is colloquially termed senility." Monica then submitted Dr. Ramirez's detailed written report into evidence. I saw Clarice's jaw tighten, and David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mr. Henderson's attempt to discredit Dr. Ramirez on cross-examination fell flat. The doctor was unshakable, her expertise evident. Next, Monica called me to the stand. My heart hammered against my ribs, but as I walked to the witness box, I focused on my breathing, on the image of Arthur's steady, encouraging smile. I swore to tell the truth, my voice surprisingly firm. Monica began gently, asking me about my daily life, my interests, my ability to manage my home and finances. I spoke about my garden, my book club, my volunteer work at the local library. I described how I paid my bills online, managed my small portfolio of stocks, and had recently researched and switched my energy supplier to get a better rate. Hardly the actions of a confused individual. Then, Monica guided me through the incidents David and Clarice had used to build their case. The missing folder? It wasn't missing, Your Honor, I said calmly. It had been moved from its usual place in my desk. I found it later, tucked behind an old ledger. I believe it was moved deliberately to make me appear forgetful the missed doctor's appointments. I produced confirmation letters from the clinics, showing they had rescheduled those appointments, not that I had forgotten them. The getting lost in the neighborhood? My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson from down the street, had actually provided a short, notarized letter, which Monica submitted, confirming we'd had a pleasant, lengthy chat that day about our respective rose bushes. Piece by piece, Monica helped me dismantle their narrative. She then asked about the pressure to sign financial documents. I recounted David and Clarice's persistent efforts, the powers of attorney they'd pushed on me. "Why do you think they were so insistent, Mrs. Jennings?" Monica asked. I looked directly at David, then at Clarice. Initially, I hoped it was misguided concern. I said, my voice tinged with a sadness I couldn't entirely suppress. But as time went on, especially after I overheard a conversation about competency hearings and the value of my house, I came to believe their motives were primarily financial. Mr. Henderson objected. "Speculation, Your Honor." Judge Chin sustained it, but the point had been made. Monica then produced my journal. "Mrs. Jennings, did you keep a record of your interactions with your son and daughter-in-law?" "Yes, I did." She had me read a few key entries, illustrating the pattern of manipulation and pressure. The courtroom was silent, save for my voice and the rustle of paper. Finally, Monica asked, "Mrs. Jennings, your son and his wife claim you are senile and incapable of managing your affairs. How do you respond to that?" I looked directly at Judge Chen. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and strong, "I am 72 years old. I have lived a full life. I have faced challenges, and I have overcome them. My mind is clear. My body is capable. I manage my own affairs, I cherish my independence, and I understand perfectly well what my son and daughter-in-law are attempting to do. They have mistaken age for infirmity, and perhaps kindness for weakness. I am not senile, and I am certainly not finished." Mr. Henderson's cross-examination was as aggressive as Monica had predicted. He attempted to twist my words, to make me seem confused or contradictory. He brought up my age repeatedly, implying that cognitive decline was inevitable. "Mrs. Jennings, isn't it true that people your age often experience memory lapses?" he asked, his tone patronizing. "Mr. Henderson," I replied calmly, "people of all ages experience occasional memory lapses. I misplaced my car keys last week for a moment. I believe you yourself were searching for your pen just before these proceedings began. Does that mean you are incompetent?" A flicker of surprise, then irritation, crossed his face. A small chuckle rippled through the public gallery. Judge Chin tapped her gavel lightly. He then tried to portray my meticulous record-keeping and my consultation with Monica as signs of paranoia. "So, you were secretly building a case against your own son, Mrs. Jennings? Doesn't that sound a bit excessive, a bit paranoid for someone who claims to be of sound mind?" "My son and his wife were secretly trying to have me declared incompetent and take control of my assets, Mr. Henderson," I retorted, my voice firm. I believe my actions were a prudent and necessary response to a very real threat. I was protecting myself. He pressed me on my finances, trying to suggest they were too complex for me to handle. I calmly explained my investment strategy, the research I did, the financial news I followed. At one point, he tried to trip me up on a specific detail about a stock I owned. "Mrs. Jennings, can you tell the court the current price-to-earnings ratio of your shares in TechCorp?" I paused, then said, "As of market close yesterday, TechCorp's P/E ratio was approximately 235. However, I'm more focused on its long-term growth potential and dividend yield, which has shown consistent improvement over the past 5 years, making it a solid part of my diversified portfolio. Are you perhaps confusing it with Innovate Incorporated, which has a higher P/E but is also a more volatile growth stock I hold a smaller position in?" Mr. Henderson looked momentarily stunned. I saw Monica suppress a smile. David looked down at his hands, his face flushed. Even Judge Chin raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in her eyes. The wind had clearly gone out of Mr. Henderson's sails. His final questions were perfunctory, almost defeated. When he finally said, "No further questions, Your Honor," I felt a wave of exhaustion, but also a quiet sense of triumph. I had stood my ground. I had spoken my truth. After closing arguments, where Monica reiterated the complete lack of evidence for my incompetence and highlighted the clear financial motivations of David and Clarice, Judge Chin announced she would deliver her ruling after a short recess. The wait was agonizing. David and Clarice huddled with Mr. Henderson, their expressions grim. I sat quietly beside Monica, my hands clasped in my lap. Eleanor, who had slipped into the back of the courtroom, gave me a subtle thumbs up. When Judge Chin returned, the courtroom fell silent. She looked directly at David and Clarice. This court has heard the petition for conservatorship of Mrs. Martha Jennings, filed by her son, Mr. David Jennings. The petitioners have alleged that Mrs. Jennings is suffering from senility and is incapable of managing her person and her estate. She paused, her gaze sweeping over us. Based on the evidence presented, particularly the comprehensive medical evaluation by Dr. Ramirez and Mrs. Jennings' own clear and cogent testimony, this court finds absolutely no grounds to support these allegations. Mrs. Jennings is demonstrably of sound mind, articulate, and fully capable of managing her own affairs. My breath hitched. I felt Monica's hand briefly squeeze mine. Furthermore, Judge Chin continued, her voice stern, the timing and nature of this petition, coupled with the attempts to gain control of Mrs. Jennings' finances prior to this action, raised serious concerns about the petitioner's motives. This court does not take lightly attempts to misuse the legal process for personal gain, especially when it targets vulnerable members of our community, though in this case, Mrs. Jennings has proven herself to be anything but vulnerable. She looked pointedly at David. Mr. Jennings, your mother has demonstrated more acuity and resilience in this courtroom today than many people half her age. Perhaps you should reflect on what true care and respect for one's elders actually entail. Finally, she delivered the words I had longed to hear. The petition for conservatorship is hereby dismissed, with prejudice dismissed. With prejudice, meaning they couldn't just refile it next week. It was over. A wave of relief, so profound, washed over me that I felt lightheaded. Tears welled in my eyes, but this time, they were tears of vindication, of gratitude. David's face was ashen. Clarice looked furious, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. As Judge Chin exited, the courtroom buzzed. Monica turned to me, her face beaming. You did it, Martha. You were magnificent. The aftermath in the courtroom was a blur of quiet triumph and raw, exposed emotions. As Monica gathered our papers, I saw David approach, his face a mask of disbelief and something that might have been shame, though it was hard to tell beneath the anger. Clarice trailed him, her expression venomous. Mom, David began, his voice strained. We were just trying to help. I looked at him, my son, and felt a deep, cavernous sadness. The love was still there, a stubborn ember, but it was now overlaid with the ash of betrayal. No, David, I said, my voice quiet but firm, holding his gaze. You were trying to take. There's a difference. Clarice stepped forward, her eyes blazing. You ungrateful old woman. After everything we've tried to do for you, you'll regret this. You'll end up alone and helpless. And then who will you call? Monica stepped smoothly between us. I believe these proceedings are concluded, Mrs. Jennings. Perhaps it's best you leave. Clarice shot Monica a glare, but seemed to realize she had no ground left to stand on. She grabbed David's arm, practically dragging him away. He didn't look back. Watching them go, I felt a pang. This wasn't how a family was supposed to be. But their departure also felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders. The fight was over. I had won. Eleanor rushed up, her face wreathed in smiles, and hugged me tightly. Oh, Martha, I knew you could do it. You were incredible. Her genuine joy was a balm. Outside the courthouse, the city air felt fresher, the sunlight brighter. The world seemed to have regained its color. Monica walked me to my car. You should be very proud of yourself, Martha, she said. You stood up to them, and you won on your own terms. I couldn't have done it without you, Monica, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You gave me the strength and the strategy. You had the strength all along, Martha, she replied with a smile. I just helped you find the map. The drive home was quiet. I replayed moments from the hearing in my mind. Judge Chen's stern words to David, Clarice's sputtering anger, my own voice speaking truths I had held tight for so long. When I walked back into my house, it felt different. It was unequivocally mine again, no longer a property to be appraised and seized, but my home, my sanctuary. The silence was profound, no longer filled with the unspoken tension of David and Clarice's visits, but with a peaceful solitude. That evening, I didn't cook. I ordered my favorite pizza, opened a small bottle of wine I'd been saving, and sat in my garden as the sun set. The roses, my faithful companions, seemed to nod in approval. I felt a sense of profound peace, but also a thread of melancholy. The victory was sweet, but the cost, the irretrievable breakdown of my relationship with my only son, was bitter. There would be no more shared holidays, no more birthday carrot cakes, no more pretense of a happy family. That part of my life was over. But as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, another feeling emerged, a sense of liberation. I was free from their manipulations, free from their suffocating concern. I was my own woman again, fully and completely. The next day, I began to reclaim my life in small, tangible ways. I changed the locks on my doors, a precaution Monica had advised. I reviewed the changes I'd made to my will with a sense of quiet satisfaction. My assets would now go to people and causes that truly reflected my values, a portion to Eleanor, as a thank you for her steadfast friendship, a significant donation to the local animal shelter I'd always supported, and a trust fund for my grandniece's education. David would receive a token amount, enough to show he hadn't been entirely forgotten, but not enough to reward his greed. It was a statement. I also started making plans. The house, while loved, held too many recent, painful memories. Perhaps it was time for a change, a smaller place, maybe by the coast, something I'd always dreamed of. The thought was exciting, a new chapter waiting to be written. The phone rang a few days later. It was David. His voice was subdued, hesitant. Mom?
Can we talk?
I paused. What is there to talk about, David? I just wanted to say,
I'm sorry, Mom.
Things got out of hand. Was it genuine remorse, or just regret at being caught and thwarted? I wasn't sure I cared anymore. I appreciate the sentiment, David, I said, my voice polite but distant. But the damage is done. I need time. I didn't offer an invitation to visit. I didn't suggest a reconciliation. Some wounds I was learning didn't heal cleanly. Some relationships, once broken, could not be pieced back together in the same way. And perhaps they shouldn't be. My peace was too precious, too hard-won, to risk again so soon. I was no longer just Martha, the mother. I was Martha, the survivor, the woman who had faced down her own son in court and emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably whole and profoundly empowered. And that, I realized, was a victory worth more than any inheritance.